Okay, let's talk about object-oriented programming. And one of the best way that you can learn about object-oriented programming is by thinking of computer games like Age of Empire. And this is a great game. It's one of my favorite games. And I did a Google search where you can see different images of this game. In this game, you can create different buildings. You can create different types of people, soldiers, farmers, and so forth. And you can have these units go and fight each other. And so forth. It's a great game and it's a lot of fun. Alright, so let's say you are a developer and I will want you to create a game like the Age of Empire. How would you go about creating a game like this? Well, first you kind of have to plan what different things you will have in the game. So let's say that we decide to have, let's just make the game very simple. Let's say that we decide to have 3 different types of buildings. So we'll say one's called a barrack. And the barrack can do different things. Mainly, it will create different soldiers that we can send off to fight different enemies. And let's say we also have a farm. And let's say we can also have a temple. Okay? Now, when we look into each of these things, let's break it down even further into 2 categories. One is, what can each of these barracks have and what can it do? Or what can each farm have and what can it do? So what can the barracks have? Well, each barrack can have, let's say, an X and Y coordinate, and maybe the building itself has some type of health so that when the enemy attacks, maybe initially the health is 100 and it goes down, and when the health is 0, then it destroys. Now, what can each barrack do? Well, it can, let's say, create soldiers, it can move, and it can also destroy. And there are probably other things that you can come up with that you can have each barrack have and do. And same thing with the farm. We can say each farm has an XY coordinate, maybe it has its own health as well, and maybe it has capacity which determines how much food it can produce each day. And farm can also move, it can also destroy, and so forth. Okay? Alright, so this blueprint that I created, this outline that I created in computer programming, that's called class. And class is merely a blueprint of what I want to do. And it has mainly two categories. One is, what can it have? And these are called attributes. And what it can do. And the do part, the functionalities, are called methods. Okay, and methods are just functions inside a class. Attributes are variables inside a class. Okay, so now that I have this blueprint, did this actually create any barrack or did it create any farms or temple? It didn't, right? So what we're going to do is now using this blueprint, we can create a barrack. So this is my barrack represented by a circle. I'm going to create another barrack and another one. So I created 3 different barracks using this. Now these objects that I created are also called instances. It's also called objects. Okay, so using the blueprint, using the class, I can create different instances or different objects. Okay, and sometimes they say off of the class you're instantiating an object, but in essence, instance and objects, they're exactly the same thing. And each of the instance can also, for example, it will have its own X and Y coordinate, and it can also it also will have these different functionalities. Okay, so the instance has its own X and Y, its own health. This instance, this barrack, will also have its own unique X and Y and health. And any of the variables, any attributes or methods that the instance has independently, those are called instance attributes or instance methods. Okay, so now a few more things. What if there are some attributes or some methods that you don't want the instances to have? So let's say, for example, that you don't want them to self-destroy and you still want this functionality, but you want to make it private. You don't want to make it available to these instances. Well, when you create these methods or functions, you can make them private. And when you make a method private, or when you make an attribute private, then these private attributes or methods are no longer can be accessed by the instances. Okay? Usually in many programming languages, if you just create default attributes and methods without specifying whether it's a public or private, it's automatically set as the public, and public attributes and methods are available within the class and also available to each of the instances. Okay? So we talked about how you can make any of these attributes public or private. Okay, let's introduce a few more terms. So what if there were some things that you wanted to do whenever you created an instance? Whenever you created an instance of the barrack, what if you wanted to give it a default X and Y health? Maybe you want to give it a health of 100, and when the enemy comes, you want that to go down a little bit. Well, there is a special method that you can implement called the constructor. And different languages does this a little bit differently. If I name my blueprint barrack, in some languages, if you have a method called barrack, then that's the program will automatically assume that's your constructor. And constructors are basically method that the program will run whenever you construct a new instance. So again, if you want to do something whenever a new instance is constructed, put that inside a constructor. And depending on what language you're using, just do a Google search and find out how you can create a constructor, whether you're using PHP, Ruby, Python, C# or Java, or whatever. Okay? All right, so those are what constructors are called. Some languages also have what's called Destructor. And that's very simple. These are methods, or this is a method that is run whenever that object is later destroyed, when it is erased from memory, and so forth. Okay, few more concepts. Let's say that the barrack can upgrade. So it can move into a few different directions. Okay, so we start out with the basic barrack, and maybe later this becomes barrack 2. Or it can also become another, let's call it barrack B, and let's call this barrack A. Okay, and this is an upgrade. And it can do, it has everything that the barrack has. It can do everything that the barrack can do, but it just has few more. Okay, it has some additional attributes. It also has additional methods. This also has additional attributes and additional methods. Okay, off of the barrack. Okay, well, what I can do using object-oriented program is instead of copying all these attributes over and starting, I can simply say, hey, I'm going to create a new class called BA and have it inherit everything that the barrack has and everything that it can do. Okay, and this is called inherit. And when we do inheritance, the class can basically inherit all the attributes and methods that the parent class has. Okay, and I can just specify additional attributes and methods in my child class. Okay, all right, now just one more thing. So let's say off of this BA, I created some objects like this. I created, let's say, 3 objects of this. And of course, this is going to have everything that I specified over here, as well as what I specified over here. Now, private method in the barrack, is that going to be available to this instance? It wouldn't be, because it's private for that. Okay, but will this private method be inherited to this blueprint itself, the BA blueprint? And the answer is no. Anything that's private inside the class doesn't get inherited. So what if I wanted these methods to stay private among the instances, but I still wanted to allow this to be inherited to my children class? Well, there is another property called protected. And if you say protected, you're protecting this among your children. It will still remain private among all the different instances, but it will allow your children class to inherit them. Okay, so here I'm going to put another method called protected. Okay, so in essence, that's what object-oriented programming is. And you can study different languages to study how different syntaxes are done, but using OOP, it allows us to create games like this, but it also allows us to organize our codes a lot better. And the example that I use is, for example, if you had 1 million photos and if you put it all in a single folder, that could be very confusing. Well, OOP allows us to, in a way, to create folders to organize our files. So instead of having 1 million files inside a single folder, now after you learn OOP, you know how to create a folder, how to put different functionalities into each of the folder. And that way you can organize your codes a lot better, create cool games like the Age of Empire, and make everyone happy.